New York, the morning of December 4th, 2024. On the sidewalk outside the Hilton Midtown, a man collapses. It is Bryan Thompson, the head of one of the largest insurance companies in the United States. 5 days later, at a McDonald's in a small town in Pennsylvania, police will detain an Ivy League graduate from a wealthy family. On the shell casings near the hotel, investigators will find 3 words borrowed from a well-known book about how insurers refuse payouts. Inside the backpack of the man being detained, a homemade firearm and a short handwritten text. And on social media, the country will unexpectedly, even for itself, start arguing about how to treat the figure of the accused at all. How did a young programmer from Baltimore end up at the center of one of the most talked about criminal cases of 2024? And what did the country actually see in that morning? December 4th, 2024, New York. The day is just beginning to break. The clock reads 6:45 in the morning. On West 54th Street, in the very heart of Midtown, the occasional passerby hurries past shop windows and parked taxis. Steam rises above the street from the sewer grates. And in that steam, you can see the silhouette of a man in a dark coat. He is walking from the direction of a neighboring hotel toward the main entrance of the Hilton Midtown. This is Bryan Thompson, 50 years old, the head of the insurance division of United Healthcare, the largest private medical insurer in the United States. On this day, the Hilton is hosting the annual investor conference of its parent company, United Health Group. Analysts, shareholders, and fund representatives from all over the country are flying in for it. Thompson arrived from Minnesota and decided not to take a company car for the short stretch between hotels. He is walking alone, on foot. And at this moment, he is literally about 50 meters away from the entrance. A street surveillance camera mounted on the hotel facade captures what happens next. From behind a stack of black trash bags, from a shadow the streetlight barely touches, a figure appears in a black hooded jacket and a mask covering the lower half of the face. The person moves in a focused, composed way. In his hands is a weapon fitted with a homemade device for muffling sound. What is happening barely attracts attention against the noise of the morning city. Thompson sinks to the sidewalk. The attacker turns, walks off in the direction of West 55th Street, crosses the road, and climbs onto a rented city bike. Within minutes, he is already beyond the block, heading towards Central Park. By that moment, passers-by on West 54th Street have stopped. The first shouts can be heard. A few minutes later, police and paramedics arrive, but Thompson cannot be saved. He will pass away at the nearest hospital. A few blocks away, the bicycle calmly rolls through the morning streets of the city, and no one around yet understands what has just happened. The bicycle is still moving toward the park, and at the scene outside the hotel, a task force of the New York Police Department is already being assembled. The very first thing the investigators do is pull every available camera in the neighborhood. Street cameras, lobby cameras, cameras on the entrances of neighboring buildings, cameras on the intersections. Within a few hours, they have dozens of hours of footage in their hands that has to be watched frame by frame. The first version of the investigation sounds like this. It was a carefully planned attack aimed personally at Bryan Thompson. Several details line up in favor of this version at once. The shooter knew exactly what time his target would step out onto West 54th Street, knew his route between the 2 hotels, and had taken up position near the trash containers in advance. He had a mask, gloves, a hood, and a thought-out escape on a bicycle. According to forensics, the weapon was fitted with a homemade sound suppression device. None of this looks spontaneous. It looks like the actions of a person who had been preparing. But within a few hours, one detail emerges that shifts the entire initial picture. Forensic specialists find spent shell casings at the scene. Scratched into the metal with a sharp object are the words, deny, defend, depose. For the American reader, this is almost a direct quote. 3 of the 4 words from the title of a well-known book about the tactics insurance companies use when denying claims. In the assessment of the investigation, the message is addressed not to a personal conflict, but to the entire industry as a whole. The prosecution at the same time stresses, an address of this kind does not change the legal qualification of what happened as a serious crime against a specific person. Over the course of the day, the New York Police Department announces a reward of up to $10,000 for information on the shooter. The Federal Bureau of Investigation adds up to another $50,000. Stills from the surveillance cameras go out to TV channels and spread across social media within hours, pulling in millions of views. In parallel, details about the victim appear in the news. 50 years old, 2 children, more than 20 years in the insurance industry. The last few years at the head of the largest private health insurer in the United States, with hundreds of millions of clients and a long history of lawsuits over denied coverage. The story of one of the largest insurers in the country and the story of the incident itself begin to intertwine, and the investigation gradually moves away from the theory of a contract attack. What helps here is not major evidence but small details, the kind that usually slip past on a first viewing. Investigators reconstruct a timeline not only of the morning of December 4th, but of several days before it. A few days before the event, a man dressed the same way as the shooter outside the hotel checks into a hostel on the Upper West Side. This is an inexpensive place for tourists and young travelers, with ordinary staff at the front desk and guests who move freely through the common areas. At one point, a camera above the desk records how this man briefly pulls his mask down and smiles at a young female employee. It is a completely everyday shot, with nothing that would give away a person filmed that same week outside a New York hotel. This particular frame becomes one of the main identifying images. Investigators obtain a clear picture of the face and send it out through every federal and regional channel. The footage is shown on the news and posted on social media. In parallel, it turns out that the man had registered at the hostel using a fake identification document, a made-up name, a photo that had been adjusted. This is one more link in the picture of an operation prepared in advance. After the event, he does not try to disappear inside New York. Cameras capture the cab he takes to a bus terminal on Manhattan, and he leaves the city. Later, an abandoned backpack is found in Central Park. Inside, along with some personal items, are bills from the board game Monopoly. For the investigation, this is an important signal. It was not an attempt to hide money. It was a demonstrative gesture, almost theatrical. The picture inside the investigative team is changing. According to investigators, what they are dealing with is not a hired attacker who tries to wipe away every trace. They are dealing with a person of interest who deliberately leaves visible details, from inscribed casings to toy money, and in doing so, in the view of the investigation, is trying to set a certain frame of perception around what happened. The suspect is already outside New York, and the investigation understands that from now on, the search will have to cover not one city, but the entire country. From December 4th through December 8th, one of the loudest manhunts of recent years unfolds in the United States. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the New York State Police mobilize hundreds of officers. Colleagues from other states join in along the suspect's possible travel routes, from the East Coast to the Midwest. On TV and on social media, around the clock, 2 images are in rotation, images that, by the end of the week, have become recognizable to tens of millions of people. The first, the silhouette outside the hotel in a night jacket, hood, and mask. The second, the smiling face of a young man at the reception desk of a hostel. Authorities open hotlines and ask people to send in any information. And people really do call. They share hunches, recognize acquaintances and strangers, describe suspicious encounters. Most of the reports lead nowhere, but some help narrow the circle. In parallel, a completely different story is unfolding on social media, and it is that story that stuns commentators the most. The photo of the man at the hostel spreads aggressively across platforms. Users discuss his appearance, his clothing, his posture, guess at the origin of his surname, build versions of his biography. Themed compilations and memes appear. And against that backdrop, people with hard experiences of dealing with the medical insurance system begin to speak up. The stories come one after another. A refusal to cover an operation, endless appeals in the face of a serious diagnosis, bills for hundreds of thousands of dollars after routine treatment. Under videos and posts featuring the footage from outside the hotel, comments multiply in which discussion of the case blurs into grievances against the industry. The atmosphere around the case becomes dual. Officially, there is a search underway for a dangerous suspect who needs to be apprehended as quickly as possible, and his actions are unambiguously classified as a serious crime. Unofficially, part of the internet reacts with unexpected sympathy without knowing the suspect's name or biography, and experts immediately call this reaction alarming. On the fifth day of the hunt, this double tension reaches its peak, and it all resolves not in a megacity, not in an airport, not on a state border. It all happens in a small town in Pennsylvania, in an ordinary roadside fast food restaurant. That restaurant is in the small town of Altoona, Pennsylvania, on East Plank Road. December 9th, 2024. Morning. The dining room is almost empty. Employees are stacking cardboard trays under the counter. The first orders are being prepared at the register. At one of the tables sits a young man in a dark jacket. He is eating breakfast and working on a laptop, occasionally glancing at his phone. There is a mask on his face, a detail that draws attention this morning. A regular customer at the restaurant notices a resemblance between this man and the photos from the news. The same eyes, the same eyebrows, the same oval face as in the image from the New York hostel. The hesitation is brief. The customer tells an employee at the McDonald's, who calls the local police. Within a few minutes, a patrol car pulls up to the restaurant. The officers enter, approach the table, and ask him to remove the mask. The man complies. Then they ask the standard questions and ask for identification. He hands over an ID, but it turns out to be a forgery. Neatly made, but not matching the database. That is enough to detain him on the spot. He is led out of the dining room in front of the few customers present. And within the hour, the contents of his backpack are already laid out on a table at the Altoona police station. Inside the backpack, they find a homemade firearm, a so-called ghost gun, a weapon without a serial number, manufactured in a do-it-yourself fashion. Next to it, a homemade sound suppression device, a fake ID, a small amount of cash, and several handwritten pages with a short text about corporations and the healthcare system. The Altoona police immediately notify their colleagues in New York about a possible match between the weapon and the one used outside the hotel. A few hours later, the New York Police Department makes a public statement. Detained in Pennsylvania is Luigi Nicholas Mangione, 26 years old, a native of Baltimore. The investigation receives not only the weapon, the documents, and the text, but, most importantly, a name. From this moment, a new phase begins. The country is introduced to a biography that does not at all look like the one it expected. The biography that unfolds before the country at first glance seems to have nothing in common with the image of the hooded man outside the New York hotel. Luigi Nicholas Mangione was born in 1998 in Baltimore, Maryland. His family is one of the well-known Italian-American families in the city. Luigi's grandfather, Nicholas Mangione, was a major developer and entrepreneur. He owned a country club, a network of real estate properties, businesses in hospitality and wellness. In Baltimore, this family name has been known for a long time, tied to charitable initiatives and involvement in civic life. Luigi grows up in this environment and gets everything a child from a well-off family can get. He attends one of the most prestigious private schools in Baltimore, plays sports, reads a great deal. In his graduation year, he is named the top student in his class and delivers the class speech on behalf of the graduating group. Next, admission to the University of Pennsylvania, one of the Ivy League universities. He chooses the computer science department, a serious technical field that requires strong mathematical preparation and discipline. Over his years at the University of Pennsylvania, Luigi earns a bachelor's degree and then a master's. His academic reputation is even, without scandals, without disciplinary issues. After university, he moves to California, where he works at several tech startups and on larger programming projects. In particular, his name is mentioned among the employees who collaborated with a platform connected to the automotive market and digital services. Friends and acquaintances describe him as a calm, well-read person, passionate about books and physical activity. His social media accounts are filled with book reviews, photos from workouts and travels, collections of articles on technology, philosophy, and social systems. He leaves detailed reviews of the books he reads and often mentions authors who write about pain, inequality, and corporate ethics. Nothing in this biography, viewed from the outside, up until December of 2024, suggests that one day his name will end up at the center of one of the most talked about criminal cases of the decade. The turning point that changes everything begins several years earlier and is connected not with his studies or his work, but with his body. According to accounts from people close to him and publications by his relatives, in the early 20s, Luigi suffers a serious back injury. Different sources give different circumstances. Some link the injury to his active lifestyle and sports. Others speak of an accident. The essence is the same. A young, previously healthy body develops a problem with the spine that causes severe chronic pain. For a person used to training, traveling, and working long hours at a computer, this is a blow that cannot be ignored or quickly forgotten. In the summer of 2023, he undergoes an operation. Later, photos of X-ray images showing a metal construction in his spine are found on his social media. He posts those images himself on one of his accounts. It is an unusual gesture. Such shots normally stay in private archives. After the operation, the condition improves, but not fully. The pain returns in waves, interferes with sleep, work, training. That same year, he goes to the emergency room with a flare-up. Judging by his online activity, it is from this moment that his attention begins to shift. He reads a great deal about pain, about spinal injuries, about chronic conditions. In parallel, about how the medical insurance system works in the United States, how procedures for covering expensive operations function, how appeals are built when claims are denied. Books about technology, about inequality, about corporate ethics, about the state of American healthcare appear in his reviews. He leaves extensive comments, highlighting specific chapters and ideas. At the beginning of 2024, Mangione gradually drops out of sight of family and friends. He stops answering messages, does not show up at family events, does not stay in touch with those who used to communicate with him regularly. His mother files a report with the police about a possible disappearance. At that point, this is not about a criminal matter, but about the concern of relatives who have lost contact with a loved one. It is precisely during this period, according to the investigation, that preparation begins for what will later become the subject of the criminal case. In the prosecution's version, he studies routes, schedules, public events. The steady rhythm of his former life is replaced by actions that the investigation classifies as deliberate preparation for a serious crime. It is about the details of this plan that a document seized in Altoona speaks for the first time. In the backpack lying on the table at the McDonald's, among the other items, is a handwritten text. According to the investigation, its length is about 262 words. That is not much. For comparison, a typical manifesto by perpetrators of high-profile crimes in the United States used to run to dozens or hundreds of pages. Here, a few sheets covered in neat handwriting, with no operational details, with no direct threats to specific people. The investigation and the press immediately call this text a manifesto, although in form, it is closer to a short statement. It talks about the American medical insurance system and about the conduct of the largest companies in the industry. The author describes how the machine of denying coverage works, how insurers extract profit from delays and bureaucratic procedures. The author criticizes the industry in sharp language and, according to investigation materials, makes it clear that he considers his actions justified from his own point of view. In its comments, the prosecution emphasizes that such a position on the part of the author of the text does not remove criminal responsibility and does not justify what took place. In this document, there is no list of targets, no calls on anyone else to repeat such actions, no detailed description of an ideology. There is only an accusation addressed to the industry, and a concise justification of the author's own position. Later, the prosecution discloses fragments of another text, a diary Luigi kept in the preceding months. These entries were found on the seized devices and are quoted in the court materials. In August 2024, according to the prosecution, in one of the entries, the author formulates an internal readiness for the step he is planning. In those same entries, as the investigation claims, there is an ironic reference to the major annual events of the insurance and financial industries. In the prosecution's version, this is an intention aimed against the insurance industry as a whole, and a specific figure was seen by the author of the text as its public symbol. According to the investigation, it is precisely the annual investor meeting of United Health Group that becomes a logical point of reference for him. The largest public stage of the largest company in the sector, with a time and place known in advance. In the investigation's version, the choice of the victim was not personal, but tied to her public role in the industry. Bryan Thompson, according to the prosecution materials, was viewed by the author of the text not as an acquaintance and not as a private opponent, but as a recognizable public face of the sector. At the same time, the prosecution emphasizes separately that such logic on the part of the author of the text has no legal or moral justification. What is at issue is the death of a specific person with a family and loved ones. The country sees in that frame outside the hotel not only a specific man on the sidewalk, it sees a reflection of decades of its own relationship with the insurance industry. And that is precisely what explains the reaction that unfolds on social media after the arrest. From the moment Luigi Mangione's name becomes known, the internet lights up. Commentators, analysts, ordinary users themselves admit that they did not expect a wave like this. On social media, people massively share stories of those who were denied coverage for expensive operations. They talk about loved ones who passed away in the middle of long appeals and refusals, about families who sold their homes to pay for treatment, about bills that arrived months after discharge from the hospital. Under the hashtags related to the case, tens of thousands of posts appear with one shared theme: corporate greed and insurance bureaucracy that for years has worked against the patient. Part of the public begins to perceive the figure of the accused outside the criminal context. His images from the hostile reception turn into avatars and wallpapers. Authorities, major media outlets, and medical associations firmly condemn such sentiment, reminding people that this is a criminal case about the death of a human being, and any romanticization of the defendant is ethically unacceptable. But this does not stop the wave entirely. Some entrepreneurs begin producing merchandise with his image, and certain online stores report a rise in sales of such items. Outside the courthouse in New York, on key hearing days, supporters gather with signs. Some come in t-shirts with slogans about the healthcare system, others with quotes from open letters by former patients. Experts on the psychology of mass reactions, writing columns in leading publications, explain what is happening as years of accumulated irritation with the industry, fatigue with the dynamic of dealing with corporations, and a sense of being unable to influence their decisions. United Healthcare steps up security at its offices, changes safety protocols for its executives, removes some photos of top management from the official website. Bryan Thompson's family issues a short public statement. His relatives ask for the memory of this person, a husband, a father, a colleague, to be respected, and emphasize that they do not want him to be reduced to a job title. But in the space of the public discussion, their voice sounds quiet. The country is not discussing a single person who passed away. It is discussing the system itself. Alongside the public debate, a very concrete legal process is also underway, and it unfolds on two levels at once. On December 19, 2024, Mangione is extradited from Pennsylvania to New York. His transfer resembles an operation for an especially dangerous subject: a helicopter, patrol boats on the river, a motorcade of several cars, heavy security. Television channels show footage of him stepping off the plane in handcuffs, in an orange jumpsuit, surrounded by officers in body armor. On the same day, federal prosecutors bring their own charges. This is a separate line that runs parallel to the state case. Among the federal counts is a statute on the use of a firearm in a serious crime, under which, in theory, the highest penalty is possible. This immediately raises the stakes of the case to the maximum. At the same time, the New York State prosecution brings a charge of a first-degree offense qualified as an act of terrorism. The classification is a rare one, and itself becomes the subject of legal arguments. In the view of the prosecution, the purpose of the defendant's actions was broader than the personal one. This was violence aimed at intimidating a civilian population and influencing the policy of a state or a corporation. The defense categorically disagrees with this. On December 23rd, Mangione appears in state court. He enters a plea of not guilty on the charges brought against him. His defense is led by a prominent attorney known for high-profile cases, with a reputation as a specialist in complex criminal trials. From the very first hearings, the defense raises questions about how the phone, laptop, and handwritten text were obtained, challenges the legality of a number of procedures in Altoona, and files motions to exclude part of the evidence. It also insists that qualifying the crime as terrorism does not match the facts of the case. Two parallel lines, the federal and the state one, move simultaneously, and each one creates its own risk for the accused. Even if one side results in an acquittal on some count, the other line will continue to operate. For the defense, this means double the work on two levels, with different logics, different prosecutors, and different judges. For the public, 2 proceedings, each of which will be followed separately. Throughout 2025, each of these proceedings is indeed followed separately, and every move by the sides is analyzed minute by minute. The courts of New York and the federal courts hold a series of pre-trial hearings at which the fate of key pieces of evidence is decided. A significant part of the discussion is taken up by the question of how the Altoona police handled the detainee during the first hours. The defense claims that part of the evidence was obtained with violations. Search procedures, the timing of when charges were brought, and the handling of personal belongings are all called into question. A separate discussion unfolds around the way in which biological material for comparison was obtained from the detainee. In the defense's version, in the first hours of detention, informal methods of collecting traces were used, which were later documented after the fact. The judge examines each motion carefully. In most cases, the key pieces of evidence, the homemade firearm, the sound suppressor, the documents, the handwritten text, and the contents of the digital devices, remain in the case. Some minor elements are excluded, but the overall evidentiary base of the prosecution is preserved. In parallel, a separate technical effort is underway. Experts reconstruct the origin of the weapon, conduct forensic analyses of the seized items, and study device logs, browser history, and notes in apps. Outside the building, supporters gather constantly. They hand out flyers about the insurance system, hold signs, run live streams on social media. Journalists from the largest outlets file reports from the street. Inside the courtroom, among the attendees are correspondents from leading newspapers and television channels, hosts of podcasts about major cases, and documentary filmmakers working on projects for streaming services. Every hearing turns into a media event, with attention scheduled in advance. The prosecution insists on holding the main trial as soon as possible. In the prosecutor's arguments, dragging things out only amplifies the public noise and interferes with the normal work of the court. The defense, on the contrary, pushes for time. It needs to prepare its own version of the defendant's behavior, to gather medical records on the condition of his back and his general health, to interview people close to him. Every set of hearings passes between these 2 lines, and by the beginning of the following year, the case is approaching its main stage. By the beginning of 2026, the case is approaching its main stage at once in 2 jurisdictions. The state court in New York sets a reference point for the main proceedings. The federal line prepares its own schedule. On both lines, the prosecution is working in parallel, and the defense is gathering witnesses and documents. The decisions the judges and jurors will make will determine the fate of a specific person, and part of how America will talk about cases like this in the future. United Health Group publicly insists that it will continue its work and will not allow fear to change the industry. The company announces a review of internal procedures, promises to improve communication with clients, and launches a series of initiatives around the handling of appeals. At the same time, United Health remains the largest player in the market and does not change the basic principles of its business. For millions of clients, the everyday experience of dealing with the insurer, calls, forms, responses, remains similar to what it was before December. Healthcare experts point out that public anger at insurers accumulated over years and was not born in December 2024. They remind the public that Senate committee reports from previous years had already described contested practices of automatic denials and the use of algorithms in coverage decisions. These reports remained for a long time at the level of specialized discussions. After the high-profile case, they are once again on the front pages. Mangione himself continues to receive letters from strangers. According to the defense, among the senders are patients with chronic illnesses, parents, students, retirees. Major media outlets and civil rights organizations emphasize separately. The flow of such letters does not lessen the gravity of the charges and does not turn the defendant into a hero. This remains a criminal proceeding over the death of a human being. Bryan Thompson's relatives stay away from loud statements and public interviews. They ask that he be remembered as a husband, a father, and a colleague, and not as a symbol of an industry. The next stages of the process will determine the legal fate of the accused, but they are unlikely to answer the separate question that began to ring out across the country in December 2024. Why did part of society see in one morning, outside a hotel in Midtown, not only the passing of a specific person, but also a reason to reopen old grievances against the industry? At the same time, experts, media, and officials keep repeating, No grievance against the system justifies violence, and at the center of the story remains a specific family that has lost a loved one. The limit of what is known to the investigation, and the court ends with specific evidence and testimony. Beyond that begins a territory where each person assembles the picture on their own. 4 students don't wake up on a Sunday morning in a small college town where nothing like this has happened in 7 years. On the bed of one of them, a leather sheath is left behind, the knife missing. 12 times in a single night, a white sedan circles the house on King Road. For 7 weeks, no one in the country knows who did it. And then it all comes down to a single name. A 28-year-old criminology PhD student who studies 15 kilometers from where it happened. This is the story of how modern science caught up with a man no eyewitness ever saw, and of the question he never answered. Moscow is a small university town in the north of Idaho. About 25,000 people live there, and by American standards, that's almost a village. Locals call their town quiet, safe, comfortable for students. The rhythm of its life is set by the University of Idaho. The semester begins in late August and ends before Christmas. In the fall, the streets fill with young people in sweaters bearing the university's logos. In winter, the town is buried under snow, and in the evenings, the center empties out early. The last murder in town is recorded in 2015. Since then, police reports consist mostly of student infractions, parties, forgotten keys, minor fender benders. The Moscow Police Department is a small outfit. About 30 officers serve there. Most of their working hours are spent on alcohol checks, parking, and domestic quarrels. Students have long grown used to this way of life. They walk home at 1 in the morning. They don't always lock their doors. Parents sending a child off to Moscow are pleased that the town is peaceful, that here, nothing ever happens. On local social media groups, a question sometimes pops up. What do I do if I see something strange at night? The answer is usually the same. It's probably nothing. The town doesn't know threat, and doesn't know how to recognize it. November of 2022 passes like an ordinary autumn semester. Classes run on schedule. A few weeks remain before winter break. In the coffee shops, students prepare for exams, the football team plays another game, and the first holiday lights are going up along Main Street. Nothing in the week's routine reports hints at what will happen on the night of November 12th into the 13th. The police blotters from that week are utterly mundane. And a few days later, one address in this town will be known across the entire country. The house on King Road. The house on King Road really does stand out. The address, 1122 King Road, Moscow, Idaho. A 3-story building pressed against a slope just behind campus. From the front, it looks like an ordinary single-story cottage. From the garden side, because of the drop in elevation, 3 full floors rise up. Locals call this kind of layout deceptive. From the street, the house looks modest. Inside, it turns out to be spacious. Its main feature is hidden in the back. A sliding glass door leads straight onto the 2nd floor, bypassing the main entrance. This detail of the floor plan will later become central to the entire investigation. But in November of 2022, to the residents, it seems a simple convenience. You can come and go without climbing the main staircase. 6 University of Idaho students live in the house. 3 of them will end up at the center of the tragedy. Madison Mogan, whom everyone calls Maddie, 21 years old, studies marketing and works at a local cafe. Kaylee Goncalves, her best friend since school, is also 21. They've known each other since the 6th grade. This year, Kaylee is already thinking about moving away, planning her graduation, considering work in Austin. Zana Kernodle, 20, studies marketing and belongs to the Pi Beta Phi sorority. Her boyfriend Ethan Chapin, also 20, is a member of the Sigma Chi fraternity, one of a set of triplets in a big family. He's often at this house, but he doesn't live there full time. On the 2nd floor are the rooms of Zana and Dylan Mortensen. On the 3rd, Maddie and Kaylee. On the 1st, the kitchen, the living room, and Bethany Funk's room. The house is known to the town students as a place for quiet get-togethers. Neighbors notice nothing suspicious about it. An ordinary student house among dozens just like it. One facade from the street. From the other side, a hidden, vulnerable sliding door on the 2nd floor. Saturday, the 12th of November of 2022, comes to this ordinary student house. The last warm evening of the semester. Many are planning to head home for Thanksgiving the next weekend. Moscow lives at a relaxed pace that day. Alumni cars on the streets, a student crowd in the bars, the tail end of daytime activity on campus. Maddie and Kaylee spend the evening together. First they stop at one of the student cafes, then head to the Corner Club, a popular downtown bar. Along the way they take a few short videos. Kaylee looks pensive that evening. She talks about her plans after graduation, considers moving. After the bar, the girls go to the Grub Truck food truck, order food, laugh into the camera of a local streamer who happens to catch them in frame. That video will later become one of the last records of their ordinary life. At the same time, Zana and Ethan are at a Sigma Chi event on campus. The party wraps up around 1 in the morning. The two head home together. For Ethan, it's another night at Zana's place at the King Roadhouse. He's stayed there before, but this particular night will be the last. Bethany Funk comes home earlier than the others and settles in to sleep on the first floor. Around 2 in the morning, the rest come in. Maddie and Kaylee go up to the 3rd floor, to Maddie's bedroom. That night they lie down in the same bed, something they've done before, going back to their school days. Zana and Ethan stay on the 2nd floor. Dylan Mortensen is also up there, in her own room. By 2:30, the lights in most of the windows go out. The house falls quiet. Outside, an ordinary November night runs its course. Cold, starry, still. Nothing unusual is happening in the center of Moscow. At least, that's how it seems from the inside. Outside, the ordinary November night looks the same to everyone in it. But within that night, another life is unfolding. Not in Moscow, but a bit farther off, across the state line. 15 kilometers from King Road sits the neighboring town of Pullman, Washington, home to Washington State University, one of the region's major research schools. The two campuses have a close academic relationship, with students and faculty regularly crossing the state border for business and study. Enrolled in the PhD program in criminology at Washington State University is 28-year-old Bryan Kohberger. He moved here from Pennsylvania a few months before the events. Kohberger's academic path looks tidy. Undergraduate and master's degrees at DeSales University, a suburb of Philadelphia. His master's advisor was the well-known criminologist Catherine Ramsland, author of books on serial offenders and of expert programs on behavioral profiling. Kohberger's master's thesis deals with how offenders perceive their own actions, what emotions they feel, and how they make decisions. For academic purposes, it's a standard topic in modern criminology. In the fall of 2022, Kohberger works as a teaching assistant, leads seminars on criminal justice, interacts with students. Colleagues describe him as withdrawn, guarded, but formally correct. His car is a white 2015 Hyundai Elantra with Pennsylvania plates. He drives alone. His fellow graduate students have no particular issue with him. 8 months before the November night, Kohberger places an Amazon order for a Ka-Bar knife and a USMC leather sheath, a standard military model. In his academic world, this could be considered a hobbyist's purchase. Plenty of collectors and criminology students have such knives. On the night of November 12th into the 13th, his phone registers its last signal near Pullman shortly before 3 in the morning, and then goes silent for nearly 2 hours. The phone stays silent, and during this time, a neighbor's camera in Moscow captures a white sedan. Around 4 in the morning, a car resembling a Hyundai Elantra drives past the house on King Road several times. The movement is erratic. The car makes a loop, reappears, slows down, disappears. Specialists will later count several passes around the block in that night's footage. Inside the house, the residents are asleep. On the 3rd floor, in one bed, Maddie and Kaylee. On the 2nd, Zana and Ethan. Dylan Mortensen is in her own room. Bethany Funky on the 1st floor, cut off from the upper levels and typically slow to hear sounds from above. At 4:17, Dylan Mortensen wakes up to noise overhead. She hears what she will later describe to detectives, movement and the voice of one of her housemates. A few minutes later, a man's voice reaches her. She hears a phrase she processes as, "It's okay, I'm gonna help." At that moment, she still doesn't understand exactly what's happening, but something makes her get up. Dylan opens the door to her room. In the hallway, in the half-light, she sees a figure, a man in a mask covering the lower half of his face, dark clothing, height around 178 centimeters, slim build, striking thick black eyebrows, the single facial feature that will stay in her memory. The man walks past her, paying no attention, and heads for the rear sliding door, the same door that opens directly onto the second floor. Dylan freezes. She doesn't scream, doesn't run, doesn't call. Detectives will later say that most people react this way in such situations. The brain refuses to believe what's happening. She locks herself in her room. The intruder disappears through the back door. At that same moment, the neighbors' cameras capture a white sedan speeding away from the house. The clock reads 4:20. The night continues on its course, but for 4 people in that house, it is already over. For those 4, the night is already over. For the remaining residents of the house, it goes on without their understanding. The morning of November 13th, 2022, a Sunday. Silence in the house. Dylan comes around after long hours of numbness. She assumes she had a nightmare, or that a housemate got the rooms mixed up and called out to someone in the middle of the night. Bethany Funky doesn't wake up in alarm either. She's used to late mornings in a student house. The hours pass slowly. By 11 in the morning, both women realize none of the others are coming out of their rooms. They exchange messages with friends. They ask someone to come over. There's no panic yet in their words, only an odd sense that the house is behaving wrong. Friends from their inner circle arrive around noon. At 11:58, a 911 call comes into the Moscow dispatch center. The recording captures the voice of a young man trying to explain to the operator that something terrible has happened at the house on King Road, and that one of the housemates isn't responding. In that moment, through a friend's phone, word of 4 victims leaves the walls of the house for the first time. The first Moscow PD patrol officers arrive within minutes. They go up to the upper floors and immediately grasp the scale of what has happened. More units are called in. By noon, the block is cordoned off, the streets sealed. No journalists yet, but the neighbors already understand. Something unprecedented has happened. The first official statements from police are restrained. Moscow PD representatives use the phrase, attack with an edged weapon. They speak cautiously about the number of casualties. By evening, the word spreads across campus anyway. 4 students are dead. The university suspends part of its classes. Parents call their kids by the hundreds. Local forums and Twitter fill with questions. By Sunday night, it becomes clear something has happened in Moscow that hasn't happened in decades. And everyone has the same main question. Who did this and who's next? Who did this and who's next? These 2 questions define the first days of the investigation. Moscow PD works on standard logic. In cases like this, the attacker almost always has a connection to the victims. An acquaintance, an ex-partner, a neighbor, someone from the inner circle. Detectives begin by checking anyone who was near the house the night before. They interview Kaylee's ex-partners, including the young man she had been in contact with over recent months. They check friends who visited the house that evening. They check guests of the Sigma Chi party where Zana and Ethan had been. They checked the man Kaylee had mentioned in private conversations as someone who made her uneasy. By some accounts, a local who had been seen around her at a club. They even checked the friend who made the 911 call. Each lead collapses quickly. Alibis check out. Phone data shows that the people under suspicion were elsewhere. Detectives cross-check the surviving roommates' statements, campus surveillance footage, vehicle movements. In the victim's inner circle, there is no one whose actions that night can't be accounted for. By the end of the first week, Moscow PD has not a single prime suspect. Police issue careful public statements, trying not to spark panic. The police captain asks students and residents to stay alert, but avoids details. This restraint lands 2 ways with townspeople. Some are grateful for the calm tone, others accuse the police of doing nothing. Fear grows. Parents pull their students home for Thanksgiving early. Some University of Idaho classes move online. Lock shops in the county report a surge in sales. People on King Road start sleeping with their dogs and the lights on. The house where the tragedy took place is officially sealed, a patrol car stationed outside it around the clock. And the investigation has only a general description to work with. A man in a mask, thick eyebrows, a white sedan, DNA on a sheath. Just a general description and a nervous town. That's how the case looks in November and December of 2022. By this point, the story has moved far beyond Moscow. Social media turns the investigation into a mass online project. the likes of which modern America hasn't seen before. TikTok, Reddit, Instagram, YouTube, every platform fills up with theories, speculation, maps, diagrams, accusations. Bloggers appear who broadcast daily live streams straight from Moscow, filming the house, the neighbors, the bars where Maddie and Kaylee had been. They call themselves citizen investigators and pull in millions of views. Commentators piece together full timelines based on scraps of information. Some of them come into conflict with relatives. Families publicly ask people to dial down the flood of speculation, but it only fuels the interest. The wave of attention has serious consequences for bystanders. A number of innocent people are publicly accused of involvement. Among them is a local University of Idaho professor, whom one TikTok user insistently names as involved, even though she has neither alibi questions nor ties to the victims. The professor later files a defamation lawsuit. Another case is a student whose face is spread online as looking like the attacker. He has to defend himself publicly and change his daily routine. Moscow PD receives thousands of tips. The lion's share is digital noise. Saw a strange man, a suspicious neighbor, a similar voice. Investigators sift through these tips methodically, but most are set aside. Publicly, the police ask people to stop accusing private individuals, but the internet lives by its own rules. In parallel, quiet work is going on that nobody knows about. Detectives collect footage from cameras across the town, request data from cell towers, send materials to FBI labs. The DNA profile from the sheath of the Kohberger knife is already being worked on by geneticists. And although from the outside the case seems frozen, by mid-December, investigators have in their hands what will later be called the turning point material. They only need to tie 3 threads together, and the attacker will have a name. 3 threads, 3 pieces of evidence, each of which on its own leads nowhere, but together spells out a name. The first thread is the brown leather K-bar, USMC sheath. It's left in the 3rd floor bedroom, next to one of the victims. The attacker either fails to notice it in his haste or doesn't manage to take it with him. The knife itself is not at the scene. It won't be found anywhere later, not in the house, not on the adjoining property, not along the suspected escape route. The knife stays with the attacker and vanishes along with him. On the metal snap of the sheath, forensic analysis isolates a contact DNA profile, a single male one. It doesn't match any of the residents, their guests, their ex-partners, or their relatives. And, more importantly, it's not in the standard American law enforcement databases, not in CODIS, not in local archives. For a classical investigation, this is a dead end. The second thread is the white sedan. Moscow police gather footage from every surveillance camera around King Road. FBI specialists process the video and pick out a car that appears near the house more than once on the night of November 12th into the 13th. Based on silhouette details, the model is narrowed down to a Hyundai Elantra made between 2011 and 2016. On December 20th, investigators publicly ask anyone in the region who owns such a car, or who has seen one, to get in touch. Leads pour in by the avalanche. A significant share come from various campus police departments. They cross-check their student vehicle registries. Washington State University's campus police sends over a list of Hyundai Elantras registered with them. One name on that list catches investigators' attention. A criminology PhD student who moved in from Pennsylvania. A bachelor's and master's from DeSales University. A 2015 white Hyundai Elantra. Bryan Kohberger. Up to this point, he does not appear in a single document in the case. From now on, he is at the center of quiet, focused work. A name on a list proves nothing. Investigators need to connect Bryan Kohberger to that very DNA on the sheath. The usual paths are cut off. His profile isn't in the databases. So the FBI turns to a tool that is still considered relatively new for American law enforcement. It's called investigative genetic genealogy. The essence of the method is this. Specialists do not look for a match in police databases. They upload the DNA profile from the evidence into civilian genealogical databases, where millions of Americans have voluntarily submitted their samples. In this case, they use GED match and family tree DNA, both of which allow law enforcement queries under certain conditions. The algorithm produces a list of distant relatives of the DNA's carrier. From there, classical genealogy takes over. Analysts build a family tree. They work from third and fourth cousins back to common ancestors, then from those ancestors back down again, to living descendants. The chain narrows down to one family. The family lives in Pennsylvania. The surname is Kohberger. In that family, there is a son of the right age, who is studying at Washington State University and drives a white Hyundai Elantra. Now, investigators need confirmation. To obtain a DNA sample from Bryan directly would mean tipping him off. The FBI chooses a workaround. Agents put the parents' home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, under surveillance. They wait for the family to put the trash out at the curb. They obtain a judicial warrant to seize that trash. In the garbage, they find material suitable for comparison. DNA from Bryan Kohberger's father. The FBI lab runs the comparison. The result is unambiguous. The DNA on the sheath belongs to a close relative of the man whose sample was recovered from the trash. The father and son combination is confirmed statistically to the highest reliability. The circle closes. The sheath, the Elantra, the academic address in Pullman, the geolocation of a phone that over the 4 months before the events had appeared near the house on King Road dozens of times. When all the threads gather at a single point, investigators are left with just one question: when to move in? When to move in is a tactical question. In mid-December, Bryan Kohberger leaves Pullman for winter break. Together with his father, who flew out especially to join him, they climb into the white Hyundai Elantra and drive across the entire country, from Washington State to Pennsylvania. The father will later explain this trip, which took several days, by saying his son doesn't like to fly. Investigators know about the route. Kohberger's car is captured on the road. Along the way, he is pulled over twice by police in different states for minor traffic issues. Both times the stops go by the book, with no surprises. For Bryan himself, these are standard moments. For the investigation, they are a way to confirm that this particular man is in this particular car. By December 29th, Bryan is in Albrightsville at his parents' house. A yard, a small house, Pennsylvania winter. The FBI and local police prepare the operation. In the early hours of December 30th, 2022, in the dead of night, a SWAT team approaches the house. A perimeter goes up around it. Floodlights come on. Announcements are made that a federal law enforcement operation is underway. The arrest goes down without resistance. Bryan Kohberger steps out of the house in the clothing the press will later photograph. His parents and other relatives are there, in shock. He is charged with 4 counts of first-degree offenses, plus a count of breaking into a dwelling with intent. The next day, the news leads every major American network. Moscow learns the name of the man in custody from the television. On January 4th, 2023, Kohberger does not contest extradition. He is taken to the state of Idaho, to Latah County. He is placed in an isolation unit of the county jail, and a series of preliminary hearings begins. In the courtroom footage is a young man with a distinctive appearance, with the eyebrows that in Dylan Mortenson's statement became the one memorable feature. For the town of Moscow, it is the first real moment when the faceless suspect acquires a face. The faceless suspect has a face, but the case is only entering its legal phase. Bryan Kohberger's interests are represented by Ann Taylor, a public defender in Idaho, an experienced attorney in complex criminal cases. She is the one who shapes the defense strategy that will stretch out over years. The first step is a formal plea of not guilty. In May of 2023, when the formal charges are read, Kohberger says nothing, and the court enters not guilty on all counts on his behalf. In parallel, the defense begins filing motions one after another. They challenge the very procedure used to obtain the DNA. Their argument: the use of investigative genetic genealogy and the seizure of trash in Pennsylvania are, in their view, an expanded interpretation of the Fourth Amendment, which protects citizens from unreasonable search. They challenge the phone geolocation data. They challenge the method of analyzing camera footage. They add a motion to exclude the possibility of the death penalty, which the prosecutor intends to pursue. The judge denies the most important of these motions. Separately, the defense files an alibi notice. According to his attorneys, Kohberger on that night was driving alone, as he liked to do at various hours. They argue that he has no witnesses, but that this does not make him guilty. The prosecutor, on the other hand, believes that the very absence of an alibi, together with the DNA and the Elantra, closes the picture. The court imposes a gag order, a prohibition on all sides from discussing the case publicly outside the courtroom. This limits leaks but does not stop public interest. In September of 2024, the trial is moved out of Latah County to Ada County, in the state capital of Boise. The reason? It is impossible to assemble an impartial jury in small Moscow. Nearly every resident already has a firm opinion. The date of the main trial is pushed to the summer of 2025. Tension in society builds. The victims' families prepare for a month of hearings. The defense team prepares for a fight in which their client's life is on the line. And the prosecution is already weighing possible alternative scenarios. Alternative scenarios turn out to be more than theoretical. 5 weeks before the start of the trial that Boise and the entire country had been preparing for, the prosecution and the defense come forward with a joint proposal. On July 2, 2025, a special hearing is held in the Ada County District Court. At it, Bryan Kohberger pleads guilty on all counts: 4 first-degree offenses committed in the house on King Road and breaking and entering with intent. In exchange, the prosecution drops its demand for the death penalty. For the defense, it is a way to keep their client alive. For the prosecution, a way to guarantee the case is closed without the risk of appeals and drawn-out disputes over DNA and genealogy. The judge accepts the deal, enters the plea into the record, and sets sentencing for late July. The reaction of the victims' families is not uniform. The family of Ethan Chapin publicly backs the decision. Their representatives say they are exhausted from waiting, that they want to draw a line, that a long trial would only add to the strain on everyone. Some of Maddie Mogen's relatives join that position. The family of Kaylee Goncalves takes the opposite side. Her parents and her sister go on national television, criticize the deal as too lenient, and insist on a full trial and on capital punishment. On July 23, 2025, the judge hands down the sentence: 4 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, 1 per count of the indictment, 1 for each victim. An additional 10 years for the break-in. Legally, this combination means Kohberger will never be able to file a petition for release, not even in theory. The Boise courtroom that day is packed. Each family has the chance to address the convicted man directly. Parents, sisters, brothers, Zana Kernodle's aunt, Ethan Chapin's mother, they come forward one by one and speak. Their statements go on for hours. During all of it, the convicted man sits motionless, staring straight ahead. The judge has one main question left to ask him. The main question is simple: does the convicted man have anything to say? It is a formal procedure, but it is the one the families had been waiting for, the country had been waiting for, the investigators had been waiting for. Bryan Kohberger stands up, looks toward the judge, and says briefly, "I decline to speak." He does not explain why he chose that house. He does not say whether he knew any of the victims. He does not name a motive. He does not apologize. The judge takes a brief pause, then continues with the procedure. In his closing statement, the prosecutor concedes the connection between Kohberger and the victims could not be legally proven. There is not a single document in the case file confirming a personal acquaintance, correspondence, or meeting. Investigators checked social media accounts, contact lists, phone calls. There are no matches. The only thing known for certain is the geolocation. Kohberger's phone, between June and November of 2022, shows up in the zone containing the house on King Road no fewer than 23 times. That's too many for a chance drive-by, and too few for a confirmed connection to a particular person inside the house. The prosecutor calls this a pattern of interest, but not a motive. The question of whether he knew any of the victims personally officially remains without a confirmed answer. The question of why that house, why that night, why those 4, also. The prosecution does not build an official theory of motive. Its role is closed by the fact of the guilty plea. After the sentencing, several major documentary projects come out in the U.S. Prime Video releases: One Night in Idaho, The College Murders. NBC Dateline puts together an extended episode. CBS 48 Hours films its own segment. On the book side, works appear from the journalist Howard Blum, When the Night Comes Falling, and James Patterson's The Idaho 4. All of them describe the investigation in detail, but none of them closes the central question. It stays open. The man who alone knows the answer stays silent in public, and will keep silent in prison. He will stay silent, but the town, the university, and the legal system after this case are no longer the same. The house itself is the first thing to physically change. The University of Idaho administration decides the building cannot be left standing in any form. In December of 2023, the house at 1122 King Road is torn down. The work takes a day, with relatives of the victims and journalists watching. A memorial garden with the names of the 4 students is planned for the site. The legal consequences run deeper. The Idaho 4 case cements investigative genetic genealogy as a full-fledged investigative tool. Before that, the method had been applied, including in high-profile investigations of serial cases from earlier decades, but usually to crack old archival files. Here, for the first time in such a high-profile modern case, it produces a suspect within weeks of the event. At the same time, the case stokes debate about the privacy of DNA databases. American genealogy platforms are forced to refine their user consent policies. In the state of Idaho, amendments to the procedure for transferring high-profile trials to other counties are being discussed. The Boise precedent shows that small towns cannot always guarantee impartial jurors when media interest is this high. Some of the proposals from legal scholars concern a faster change of venue in such cases. The victims' families launch foundations in memory of Maddie, Kaylee, Zana, and Ethan. The Chapin family establishes scholarships at the University of Idaho. Public campaigns raise the issue of the consequences of online harassment. Several innocent people, accused on social media, become the faces of a discussion about where citizen investigation ends and defamation begins. In Moscow, life slowly returns to its familiar rhythm. Students still rent houses near campus. The bars downtown are open. In the fall, the campus fills with new freshmen for whom King Road is a story from safety awareness videos. But for those who were in town in November of 2022, that night remains a point of reference, a point for which no explanation ever came. 23 minutes of screaming on a 911 call, 8 names, 13 years of silence. In May of 2010, 24-year-old Shannon Gilbert calls emergency services from the gated community of Oak Beach and says someone wants to kill her. The police arrive late. 7 months later, along Ocean Parkway, the first body is found wrapped in burlap, and 3 more turn up right after it. And the real killer, all this time, is working as an architect on 5th Avenue in Manhattan, designing stores for Target and Foot Locker, and coming home every evening to his house in Massapequa Park. How he lived for 13 years between these two worlds, and why nobody ever saw him. The night of May 1st, 2010, starts out for 24-year-old Shannon Gilbert like any normal working shift. She works as an escort. She met the client through an online ad, and she drives out to meet him in the gated community of Oak Beach on the south shore of Long Island. It is a narrow strip of land right by the water, where the houses sit along a quiet road, and you cannot see them from the highway. The kind of place a random person would never stumble into. The kind of place you cannot easily walk out of either. At 4:51 in the morning, Shannon dials 911. Her voice on the recording is breaking. For 23 minutes, she screams into the dispatcher that she is being chased, that they want to kill her. She does not give a precise address. She cannot pull herself together. The dispatcher tries to figure out where she is, but the woman on the other end is already running. She bursts out of the client's house, pounds on neighbors' doors, begs them to let her in. One resident opens up and lets her into the hallway. But as soon as he says he is about to call the police and asks her to wait, Shannon turns and runs again. The last time anyone sees her, she is at another front door. She is hammering on it with both fists, shouting something. Then she turns and disappears into the darkness between Oak Beach and the marshy shoreline of Ocean Parkway. After that, silence. The police arrive later than her family would have wanted. The search for Shannon Gilbert drags on sluggishly. At first, she is listed as missing. Then the line is that she might have drowned in the marsh on her own. Her body will only be found in December of 2011, 19 months later, half a mile from the spot where she last screamed into that phone. But by then, her call has already set off a chain of events that neither Shannon nor her family could have predicted. That 23-minute nighttime scream is the starting point of one of the most notorious serial killer cases in United States history. That nighttime scream will sit in the police files for 7 months, barely nudging the case forward. Suffolk County Police search for Shannon Gilbert slowly and reluctantly until December 11, 2010, when something happens that changes everything. A police officer is out on a routine patrol along Ocean Parkway, the narrow highway that stretches across the sandy spit out to the ocean. He has his K9 partner with him, and the handler is working the same direction where Shannon was last seen. The dog picks up a scent and pulls the officer into the thick brush beside the shoulder. But what she finds is not Shannon. Among the branches and sand lie the remains of a woman wrapped in coarse burlap. Everything about it points to deliberate concealment. The handler realizes at once, this is not an accident. This is a dump site. Over the next 3 days, 3 more bodies are found along the same stretch of road, all in the same burlap, all placed in the brush at short distances from each other. 4 women, 4 identical wrappings. A roadside used year after year as a single dump site. Forensic specialists document a pattern, a shared signature, a shared method, a shared highway. The names come back one after another. Maureen Brainerd Barnes, 25, disappeared back in July of 2007. Melissa Barthélemy, 24, went missing in July of 2009. Megan Waterman, 22, last seen in June of 2010. Amber Costello, 27, went out of contact in September of that same year. All 4 worked as escorts. All of them set up meetings through Craigslist and similar sites. All of them, before they vanished, had been in contact with a client who behaved almost the same way every time. He demanded privacy, insisted on hosting at his place, and stubbornly avoided anywhere with cameras or witnesses. By April of 2011, several more sets of remains are found along Ocean Parkway. 8, 10, the number keeps climbing. The victims had been lying next to a highway for years, and nobody had noticed. Shannon Gilbert's phone call suddenly turns out to be the key to something incomparably bigger. The victims had been lying next to the highway for years, and the press latches onto that detail instantly. One term takes hold across newspapers and television: the Long Island serial killer, abbreviated LISK, a name that will headline hundreds of articles over the next 10 years. At a joint press conference, the FBI and Suffolk County Police lay out their first working picture of the offender. In their view, this is one man, not several. The packaging is too similar, the victim selection too consistent, the introduction scenario too narrow. He is a white male, probably large in build, very familiar with the South Shore of Long Island. He knows where to pull over on Ocean Parkway without being seen. He is tuned into the local police schedule, and most important, he has somewhere he can calmly return to with the women without the risk of being heard. The burlap the bodies are wrapped in becomes a symbol of its own. It is coarse jute cloth, the kind used in construction and landscaping. Investigators suggest either that the offender works with his hands and is familiar with such materials, or that he has steady access to some kind of utility space. Some profilers go further. Maybe this is someone with a law enforcement background, a cop, or a former military man who handles forensic traces and routes with too much confidence. There is an alternative version too. From the very beginning, a portion of the experts doubts that all the victims are the work of one man. In their view, Gilgo Beach is simply a convenient dumping ground where different people over different years have been disposing of bodies. That theory is supported by the spread of disappearance dates, from 2007 to 2010 for the first 4, whom the press has already dubbed the Gilgo 4, and a much wider span for the other remains. In 2011, the investigation sounds confident. Deputy commissioners tell journalists that a resolution is close, that they only need to narrow down the list of suspects. Press conferences promise a quick result. In reality, there are still 12 more years of silence ahead. The picture that looked clear in 2011 will very soon begin to fall apart in the hands of the very people trying to assemble it. The picture that looked clear in 2011 very quickly starts to fall apart. And the problem is not that there was a shortage of evidence. The problem is what is happening inside the investigative apparatus itself. In 2012, James Burke becomes the chief of Suffolk County Police, a figure with a long law enforcement career and a very narrow circle of trust. His appointment brings one critical factor into the investigation. Burke categorically refuses to let the FBI anywhere near the materials. At his insistence, federal agents are effectively pushed out of the evidence work on the Gilgo Beach victims. The years when fresh data could have been processed through a single channel are wasted. At the same time, Burke starts having problems of his own. He is accused of beating a suspect in a separate, unrelated case and of trying to cover the incident up. That investigation ends up with the federal prosecutor's office. In 2015, Burke is arrested and later receives actual prison time. Alongside him, District Attorney Thomas Spoda, Burke's longtime ally, also takes the hit, loses his office, and is convicted as well. For the Gilgo Beach case, this is a disaster. Several critical years are spent not on the investigation itself, but on internal house cleaning and legal proceedings. Boxes of physical evidence sit on shelves for years, still sealed. Interrogation recordings never get digitized. Witness statements taken back in 2010 are never reviewed. The victims' families try to keep public attention focused. They openly accuse the police of negligence, give interviews, set up websites, push for new articles. The press keeps returning to Gilgo Beach, listing suspects: a local doctor, a former police officer, a lone hunter. None of those leads turn into a case. A pain of its own is the story of Shannon Gilbert. Officially, the police classify her death as an accident. The family's attorney insists she was murdered. The two versions exist in parallel, never meeting. By the start of the 2020s, Gilgo Beach has firmly earned the status of one of the most notorious cold cases in America. By the start of the 2020s, Gilgo Beach has fully turned into a symbol of failure. And it is precisely that pressure that finally forces the system to move. In February of 2022, the leadership in Suffolk County changes. The new police commissioner, Rodney Harrison, and the new district attorney, Ray Tierney, announced the creation of an interagency team, the Gilgo Task Force. The task force pulls in Suffolk County police officers, New York State police investigators, NYPD detectives, and FBI agents. For the first time in years, the Federals get full access to the materials. The team begins with the dullest but most necessary work. They haul the boxes out of the archives, digitize documents, reread thousands of pages of witness statements, crime scene reports, and lab findings. No loud announcements, no promises to reporters. In one of the boxes, they find a statement that has been sitting untouched since 2010. A witness who had lived near Amber Costello's place had told investigators back then that he had seen a large man and a big white pickup truck near her home. He described the man in vague terms, a giant nearly 2 meters tall, but he remembered the vehicle well. The model was recognizable to any car enthusiast, a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche, with its distinctive silhouette and unusually wide cargo bed. In March of 2022, the detectives do what ideally should have been done 12 years earlier. They go into the DMV databases and request every owner of a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche registered on Long Island during the relevant period. The list is long but manageable. On that list is the name Rex Heuermann, 59 years old, architect, resident of Massapequa Park, a 40-minute drive from Gilgo Beach, works in Manhattan on 5th Avenue. No prior arrests, no loud stories anywhere in his biography. The detectives request phone billing records and email data tied to him. And one after another, the time windows and geolocations line up with the ones where the Gilgo 4 client had been reaching out. A man nobody had checked for 12 years suddenly comes into sharp focus. A man nobody had checked for 12 years suddenly comes into sharp focus. And once the task force starts digging into the biography of Rex Heuermann, it becomes clear how unlikely a candidate he is. Rex Andrew Heuermann was born in September of 1963, in the very same Massapequa Park where he still lives now. It is a quiet Long Island suburb, tidy streets, identical ranch houses, school buses in the morning, lawn mowers on Saturdays. He graduates from Berner High School in 1981, in the same class as future actor William Baldwin. He earns his architecture degree at the New York Institute of Technology. By 1987, he is already working at a Manhattan architecture firm. In 1994, Heuermann opens his own company, RH Consultants and Associates. The office is on 5th Avenue, one of the most expensive streets in the world, The specialty is narrow but in high demand. New York City building codes, handling code violations, permits for renovation. In practice, he helps large corporations open and modernize their buildings without getting stuck in the bureaucracy. His clients are Target, Foot Locker, Catholic Charities, American Airlines. The list is long, publicly verifiable, with no doubts about his qualifications. In April of '96, he marries Asa Ellerup, who is originally from Iceland and already has a son, Christopher, from a previous marriage. A few years later, the couple has a daughter of their own, Victoria. The family lives in the same house in Massapequa Park, where Heuermann himself grew up. From the outside, it is a typical suburban ranch: a porch, a small lawn, a car in the driveway. Neighbors, later interviewed by reporters, describe him the same way every time: large, over 100 kilograms and almost 2 meters tall, reserved, awkward, barely speaks to anyone. Never a quarrel, never any attention drawn. One of the neighbors tells journalists point blank, "We hardly knew anything about him. He just lived next door." And that hardly knew anything about him will become the central riddle of the whole case. Behind the facade of a model biography, another life had been hiding for 13 years, and so had that white pickup. Behind the facade of a model biography, another life had been hiding for 13 years, and so had that white pickup. Now the task force moves on to the last missing link. They need to connect this man to the biological material found on one of the victims. In the spring of 2023, plainclothes detectives start trailing Heuermann. They track his route: the house in Massapequa Park, the Long Island Railroad train to Penn Station, morning coffee, the office on Fifth Avenue. The job is delicate. Get his DNA, but do it in a way that does not tip the suspect off. A formal court request is not possible right now. They do not yet have enough to secure a warrant. In cases like this, there is only one way out: so-called abandonment, DNA, that the person voluntarily throws away himself. A cigarette butt, a cup, a tissue, leftover food, any object he knowingly discards. On January 26, 2023, the surveillance team catches the moment they need. Heuermann walks into a pizzeria, buys a slice of pizza, eats it on the move. He tosses the box with the leftover crust into a trash can on Fifth Avenue. A plainclothes detective waits for him to leave, fishes the box out of the bin, seals it in an evidence bag, and drives it to the lab. From the crust, analysts manage to extract mitochondrial DNA. It is one of those rare situations where a sample that seemed impossible to work with turns out to be clean enough. In parallel, another piece of evidence is pulled from the archive. On the burlap in which Megan Waterman's remains had been wrapped back in 2010, investigators had found a male hair without a root. At the time, that hair was considered unsuitable for classical forensic examination. On April 28, 2023, a detective personally, in a separately sealed package, delivers that hair to the same lab. The new analysis runs on whole genome sequencing, a technology that had only just entered forensic work. The match they obtain is rare and convincing. The DNA on the pizza box and the DNA on the hair belong to the same man. The DNA on the pizza box and the DNA on the hair belong to the same man. The investigation now has everything it had been missing for 12 years: a name, a biography, a vehicle, a phone trail, and a direct biological link. The task force begins the final stage of the operation. On July 13, 2023, at about 8:30 in the evening, Rex Heuermann steps out of his office on Fifth Avenue after an ordinary workday. The street around him is small: tourists, office clerks, couriers with food bags. Nothing hints at what is coming. Suffolk County detectives and FBI agents close in around him. They raid him his rights. They show him the warrant. 3 major crime counts at once for the deaths of Megan Waterman, Melissa Barthelemy, and Amber Costello. Maureen Brainerd Barnes is listed separately in the warrant as the prime suspect because there is not yet enough physical evidence for a full charge on her case. Heuermann does not resist. A large man nearly 2 meters tall walks obediently to the car. The next day he appears in Suffolk County Court. On the footage, you can see that his face is puffy, his gestures uncertain, almost childlike. He utters a strained, "not guilty." The judge orders him held without bail. That same evening, tactical teams lock down the house in Massapequa Park. The driveway is cordoned off with tape, heavy equipment is brought onto the street, an excavator for digging, metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar. Heuermann's home turns into an active search scene. Asa Ellerup and her adult daughter are let out of the house. The wife, standing in her robe, looks at the camera in bewilderment. She does not understand what is happening. The news spreads faster than the first press conference can keep up with. On every cable channel in the United States, the same headline runs, "The Gilgo Beach Killer has been arrested." Anchors show archival footage from 2010, photographs of the victims. The families of the murdered women give their first interviews, most of them crying while still in disbelief. 13 years of silence come to an end on a single evening on Fifth Avenue, and the police are already heading down into the basement of the house, a basement where, according to the family, they had not gone in years. The police are already heading down into the basement of the house, a basement where, according to the family, they had not gone in years. The search in Massapequa Park will drag on for a long time, 12 days without a break, followed by several return visits over the months that come after. Hundreds of boxes are carried out of the house. Document archives, notebooks full of notes, hard drives of every vintage, from old ones yellowed with dust to recent external drives. Several crews work in parallel. One handles electronics, another goes through the living areas, a third takes apart the basement. In the basement, they find something nobody expected. A metal vault conceals an impressive arsenal of weapons, dozens of units, some of which investigators believe were kept illegally. For a man with no criminal record and no hunting documentation, the collection is extremely unusual. Scattered through various parts of the house are personal items, some of which, according to the prosecution, may match things that belong to the missing women. That claim is still cautious. It requires separate expert analysis, but it already shifts the overall picture. The central find is an old family computer from which forensic specialists recover a Microsoft Word text file. The document was created back in the year 2000 and last, edited in 2002. The file name looks bland on the outside, giving nothing of its contents away. But when the file is opened, it leaves a chilling impression. It is structured like a project specification, like a technical document from an architecture firm. Categories are marked in bold: problems, supplies, body prep. One section lists forensic risks the author wanted to eliminate. Another lists supplies. The third section the prosecution has not disclosed in detail. Its contents are being reviewed by the court under seal. The document does not read like fantasy. It reads like a working plan, like a blueprint. If a file like that already existed on Heuermann's computer at the start of the 2000s, it changes the entire scale of the case. It means he had a methodology long before the Gilgo 4 were discovered, and long before the first of the known victims. Heuermann had a methodology long before the Gilgo 4 were discovered, and long before the first of the known victims. That is exactly how the prosecution describes that basement computer file to the court. In official documents, it is given a restrained name, the planning document. That term is chosen deliberately. Heuermann is an architect. His entire professional life revolves around planning documents, around blueprints, material calculations, work schedules, and now the prosecution argues that he carried that same approach into his second life. In their words, this is a pre-planned document with a list of risks and required supplies. Investigators match the contents of the file against the way the Gilgo 4 dump sites were organized. Individual details line up: the use of burlap, the general manner of handling evidence. Not a direct proof, but a strong circumstantial argument. Having obtained the file, investigators go back down into the basement once more, this time with infrared equipment. Under that specialized light, a trace that is invisible to the naked eye shows up on the basement walls, patches where adhesive or hardware had once been applied. The shape of that area reads like a partitioned-off work zone, where plastic sheeting or equipment had apparently been kept. Specialists in crime scene reconstruction describe the basement briefly: too clean for an ordinary residential basement. It does not smell of dust and damp. It smells of bleach and cleaning products. That kind of order takes years of maintenance, and that alone is a detail you rarely encounter in ordinary life. Victoria, the daughter, and Christopher, the stepson, publicly state that they had never gone down into the lower part of the basement. It had essentially been a closed-off area of the house. The investigation does not contradict their statements. The nature of what was found there tends to support that version. A new portrait of the suspect begins to take shape. This is not an impulsive man who snapped once and lost the thread. This is a man with a double life, in which his professional habit of planning was, according to the prosecution, turned to the darkest possible use. This image, an architect working for himself, quickly receives another piece of confirmation. Within a few months of the arrest, the Suffolk County prosecutors begin expanding the list of episodes. In January of 2024, Heuermann is charged with another count, the death of Maureen Brainerd Barnes, the fourth of the Gilgo Four. Her episode is no longer labeled prime suspect, but is now a formal charge. That matters in particular for the Brainerd Barnes family, who had been waiting for this step for years. On June 6th of that same year comes a turning point that changes the scale of the case. He is charged with the deaths of two more women, Jessica Taylor, whose trail had gone cold in 2003, and Sandra Costilla, whose remains had been found back in 1993. Her case is the oldest one established so far, nearly a decade and a half before the Gilgo Four. That means Heuermann's so-called active period spans at least 17 years, not 3. In December of 2024, the prosecution expands the charges again. A new indictment is unsealed. This one concerns Valerie Mack, who disappeared in the year 2000. Her remains had been known for years only under the code designation Jane Doe No. 6. Some of them had been found in Manorville, others along Ocean Parkway. Now Jane Doe finally has a name, attached to the Heuermann case. In 2025, Karen Vergata is added to the list, a 34-year-old woman from Manhattan who had vanished back in the late 90s. She had previously been known as the Fire Island Jane Doe. In 2023, genetic genealogy had helped restore her name. That makes 7 women on the charge sheet, with the chronology of the cases stretching from 1993 to 2010. The defense tries to get separate trials for each episode, but Judge Mazzei refuses. In September of 2025, the court separately allows the use of modern DNA analyses, including whole genome sequencing, at trial. The scenario of a single consolidated trial becomes final. The scenario of a single consolidated trial becomes final, and along with it, public attention concentrates on a different question: what to do with that other life, in which Heuermann had a wife, a house, a shared refrigerator, school photographs on the wall. Through her attorney, Asa Ellerup releases a statement right after the arrest. She knew nothing, suspected nothing, and had seen in her husband a quiet family man. She insists their life together looked entirely predictable. Work in Manhattan, dinner at home, weekends with the kids. A little later, she files for divorce through the court. Ellerup later gives interviews for a documentary series on the Peacock streaming platform. There she recalls her husband's habit of periodically disappearing on firm business. Sometimes it was a day trip, sometimes longer. In her words, those very windows, based on what she has seen in the case file, coincide with the disappearance dates of the victims. She cannot explain how that existed side by side with ordinary dinners, family celebrations, and shared photographs. She says honestly, "I guess I did not know him." Victoria, the daughter, and Christopher, the stepson, release a cautious joint statement. For them, this is a very dark time, but they are not ready to discuss details. They emphasize one thing: the father they knew does not match the man described in the case materials. Inside that house, 2 worlds existed side by side. On the ground floor, architectural blueprints, work folders, paper copies of projects for Target and Foot Locker. In the lower part of the basement, that same blueprint, the planning document, and the partitioned-off zone visible under infrared light. Neighbors tell reporters about the strange contrast. Despite his prestigious job and office on Fifth Avenue, the house itself had looked run down for years, clutter piled up in the yard, curtains rarely drawn back. That contrast becomes the signature image of the entire case. A clean corner office in one of the most expensive districts in the world, and a battered ranch house with an arsenal in the basement 40 minutes down the road. For 13 years, the border between those 2 worlds ran straight through one man's daily schedule. For 13 years, the border between those two worlds ran straight through one man's daily schedule. And the longer you stare at that number, the clearer it becomes that the Gilgo Beach case is not only the story of one suspect, it is also the story of how the system around him failed. It all begins with Shannon Gilbert's phone call. 23 minutes on the line, with a living voice and living panic. At that moment, the police have everything they need to arrive quickly and capture the maximum level of detail. But the response is slow, and then the connection between her story and the subsequent discoveries along Ocean Parkway is not made right away. The key witness statement about the white pickup sits in the files for more than 10 years, untouched. And that is only one example. The hair on the burlap, the same hair that will later match the DNA from the pizza box, was also recovered back in 2010. But labs at the time did not know how to work with that kind of material. Too old, too damaged, and without a root. Whole genome sequencing technology only entered forensic practice in the late 2010s. What in 2010 looked like a useless thread, in 2023 turns out to be the key piece of evidence. In parallel, the leadership of Suffolk County Police spends years tangled up in its own criminal scandals. Commissioner James Burke is put on trial, District Attorney Thomas Spota too. The FBI is effectively cut off from the case. The absence of managerial continuity becomes a fatal factor for Gilgo Beach. Nobody at the top keeps the case in a living, active focus. When everything finally comes together in 2022, the solution looks less like a miracle and more like a late-arriving fix. New leadership, a new task force, new technology, FBI access, a fresh look at old statements. All of those elements had been available before. They were simply never assembled together in time. It is hard to call this a victory. Justice on schedule did not happen here. Between the first known victim and the arrest, 30 years had gone by. Justice on schedule did not happen here. And now, with the case moving toward trial, it is worth recording where the border of the known actually lies, and what we still do not know. As of 2025, Rex Heuermann is charged with the deaths of 7 women. In April of 2026, he pleads guilty for the first time and confirms an 8th episode, Karen Vergata. Before that, for more than 2.5 years, he had consistently maintained his innocence. His admission closes one big formal question, but opens up many others. The first and most painful of them is the fate of Shannon Gilbert. Her 911 call, remember, is what set the whole chain of events in motion. Officially, her death is still classified as an accident in the marsh. The Gilbert family insists she was murdered. Heuermann is not named directly in her case. Investigators have not closed the line of inquiry, but they have not moved it forward either. The second question is the size of the real list. The planning document was drafted back in the year 2000 and modified in 2002. By that logic, there could have been episodes earlier than the first officially established victim, Sandra Costilla, from 1993, that the investigation does not yet know about. The task force is reviewing old unsolved cases along the East Coast, going back to the late 80s. No new public charges have been brought in those yet. The third question is posed by the victims' families themselves. In their interviews, they say the same thing. Yes, they finally got an answer. No, it has not brought them relief. For them, the case does not close at the moment of the verdict, but at the moment when the names of Melissa, Megan, Amber, Maureen, Jessica, Sandra, Valerie, and Karen are finally spoken in court next to the name of the accused. The Gilgo Beach story leaves one very uncomfortable question behind. How many more planning documents like this are sitting untouched in other people's basements? And what will it take for the system to finally learn how to ask the right questions in time?